I wish I figured this out earlier, was like, to be successful, quote unquote, I think it really comes down to being yourself. Like, it sounds so cliche when you say shit like that, like, just like be yourself. No, really, like that really actually is what I think the key to success or, fulfillment is. It's like tapping into these things that like make you feel alive, that are very much unique to you. Like, if you actually look at people who have done really interesting things with their careers, that's how they've done it.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? I'm Britton Stepetic, and this is Low Key Legends, the show where I interrogate your favorite creative legends to bring you nuggets of wisdom on your creative journey. Today, I am joined across the screen by CG superstar Haruko Hayakawa. Haruko is an artist exploring the intersection between commercial creativity and pop art. She has a deep passion for consumer products and how brands shape our culture. Working with clients you know and love like Google, the New York Times, Appetit Magazine, Cometeer, Fly by Jing, Panera Bread, and so many more. So without further ado, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just a pure pleasure. Your energy is great. And it's funny because I feel like your client roster is like my typical night where I'm just like either eating a plate of dumplings covered in Fly by Jing or wanting to do that as like my ideal meal. Sitting down on the couch, like watching Bon Appetit on YouTube. This is not like made up. This is actually like my dream life.
Yeah, I really try, and I think I've always lived with this kind of thing where I want to work with brands that I actually use, brands that I really love, things that I relate to. It's been interesting over the last couple of years how I've been able to kind of navigate working with brands like Fly by Jing, CPG brands and all of that. Like, I love the food space. So, yeah, I mean, it's just nice to like be the target consumer for the brands that you also create work for, because then you really kind of understand what they're about.
Have you had a certain client that has been like a dream client, or one that you're just like, holy shit, how did that happen? Like, whether that's like naturally or organically, or like having your network work for you?
Yeah, it's so hard to say, because I think at one point there was a lot of brands that were kind of like dream brand. It's like it changes all the time. I think I'm just like very emotional and I just like move through things really quickly, but I can't name the brand, unfortunately. But there's one tech brand that I ended up working with that I never thought I would ever be approached for. I didn't think they would ever consider to work with me. And yeah, it's amazing.
You can't believe everything you read on the internet, but it came from you personally, so I have some faith in it. But is this true that you were 13 when you began your 3D journey?
Yeah, I was 13.
I mean, what was the software even like at that point in time, and like what made you fall in love with the program?
Well, when I started doing 3D and digital art, it was like really the early days of the internet. It was kind of like early 2000s. The internet wasn't what it is today, where there's just like a ton of resources. You can learn whatever you want. It was very much kind of like you hunt around for things and you stumble across information or forums or super niche kind of websites that are focused on weird things like toys or stuffed animals or things like that. So when I was younger, my mom started doing a graphic design course. She was a fine artist prior, so I was kind of interested in things like Photoshop and all of that, and I would frequent these websites like DeviantArt and like Shadowness, and I'd look at all of these like really amazing like vector and like 3D and illustration artists from the early 2000s. And I was just like so obsessed. And I was like, how do I make this? And it wasn't like it is now where you can like do a course on Cinema 4D and you can like, you have easier access to resources. So I stumbled across this landscaping program called Bryce, and it was like super like vintage CGI kind of stuff. But I learned that like I can create these reflective, chromy, abstract kind of weird things. So that was my very first kind of experience with 3D, and I was just like, I was obsessed with it. It's like I would just come home from school. That's like all I would want to do. Like I didn't want to do my homework. I would just play around with this program to like make visuals and things like that. And yeah, that's how it all started. And I would go on IRC channels and forums, and I would like talk to actual CG artists like back in the early 2000s and be like, hey, like how do you do this? Like I really want to do what you do. And you know, they're really kind enough to like give me some pointers. So that's how I stumbled into it. And somewhere along the way, found out about Cinema 4D, and I was like a real internet kid. So I was like, I'm going to just, you know, download these programs and, you know, all that stuff I used to do when I was a young kid and get access to programs and just like test them out.
What were you just like pirating these programs? Not to like put you on the spot.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's coming after you.
Yeah, so I was like a 13-year-old, and I found out that you can pirate software and LimeWire and Kazaa and all of that. So I was like, oh my God, cool. It like opens up this whole universe of like digital art for me. So, you know, I was pirating, you know, Adobe Photoshop and, you know, Quark Express, which is like ancient and nobody uses that anymore. And then Cinema 4D and 3D Studio Max and like all these programs. I would just be like, find my way around the internet, download it, play around with it, like see if I can create something fun. And yeah.
I had no idea that Cinema 4D was that old of a program, but I think it's just like, since I'm not in that world, because I was like using LimeWire to get as much music as possible, and then also to like download like Flash and try to make like little animated videos to put on like Newgrounds or like websites like that, which didn't, you know, kickstart my career or lead to anything down the road. But I'm curious what you were making in Cinema 4D or these programs at the time. Like as a kid, what was the content that you were obsessed with?
So it was like a few things. Like when it came to Photoshop and all of that, I was like obsessed with building websites and like building a blog and like skinning it however I want. Also creating like really shitty Winamp skins and things like that. So like, you know, that's what I was doing in Photoshop, like figuring out how to make like super Y2K-esque things like jelly interfaces, like icons and things like that, like how to do like gradients and glass and Photoshop. Like that's what I was obsessed with as a kid, and that's what I would do. And I'd make like website banners. Like I had this domain, I think it was like finalphase.net or something like that. I don't own it anymore. And I would just like skin my website with like different stuff. Like maybe it was video games, maybe it was anime or whatever. So that's what I was doing on like the digital website kind of side of things. And I was learning like basic coding and all of that. And then on the 3D side, I was really obsessed with like robots when I was younger. So I would like model Gundams and like weird Star Wars robots and things like that. And it was just, I look at those things sometimes and I'm just like, I don't know, I was such a strange kid. Like I was really into the sci-fi stuff.
Maybe you're just a normal kid, because I'm pretty sure I was obsessed with like Gundam Wing at that point in time. I was like, this is what I want to do. That's why I got into Flash. I was just like, I want to like animate things and work for Disney or something like of that nature. Of course, life takes you in a different direction, but I can still be obsessed with that even into my adulthood. I still look back at that fondly.
Yeah, so when I was younger, I was obsessed with Square Enix. I don't know if Squaresoft, they did the Final Fantasy games. So I used to play a lot of video games when I was younger, and I would look at these like worlds, these like beautiful like Final Fantasy series worlds and the characters, and they were like so beautiful, and it was all like so imaginative. And that was it was that got me into 3D, because I didn't know what I wanted to do as a kid, but I was kind of like, oh, like maybe I want to do like movies or like work in video games and things like that.
It seems like your work has that same quality to it that you just described, this kind of like beautiful, animated, creative, surreal fusion of CPG product or brand, and then infused with like this like 90s meets like 80s like album cover lighting. And can you speak to where your kind of style comes from, and what is the mixture and ratio of elements that goes into like a Haruko like original piece?
You know, I think my work right now is literally like like my lifetime's work of influences, experiences, all of that. When it comes to the 3D stuff, I think these really imaginative kind of environments that I like to place product in, those come from definitely, I think, you know, video games from when I was much younger. I'm also a huge fan of any Miyazaki film. I grew up on them. I think when it comes to his work, he does this thing where he plays with scale and the sense of surrealism and kind of like whimsy. And I've always wanted to incorporate that into my work as a way to tell stories around product. And then when it comes to working with products specifically, I have worked in branding, advertising, and even the photo industry for a short amount of time. And I think being around that really influenced me to work in the product space. I genuinely just like product. I think products say a lot about kind of where we are culturally, and it's kind of a reflection of, I think, consumer shopping habits and all of that. And since I enjoy that, I work kind of more in the product branded space. And then when it comes to like my specific inspirations, a lot of them are based on things that are familiar to me. Like I think there's always a sense of I want emotional familiarity in my work. So I'm highly inspired by things like Japanese woodblock prints, kind of like vintage 80s, 90s Japanese magazines and things like album covers, all of these things that I grew up with, as well as just like Japanese art. I think with a lot of my work, it's not always kind of front and center, but I'm trying to bring something familiar to me. So a lot of it tends to be of Japanese influence, of Japanese artistic influence. And I'm always trying to just like bring that into my work. Like I'm looking at this, I actually like have a piece that my grandmother painted, just like actually like right on my desk here. And it's just like, it's these kinds of things that sort of, I try to infuse into my work. And I think it creates something that's maybe uniquely identifiable to me because my style is just so much informed by my past experiences.
It sounds like you come from kind of a lineage of artistic women. You just mentioned your mother came from an artistic background. Now your grandmother paints. Do you find that your family and kind of that artistic gene has kind of been passed down, but has also been a thing that's encouraged you to maybe go into the creative career? It seems like you almost had no choice. You were playing around on the computer at 13 and skinning things for websites.
I mean, I think I had no choice because I was such a handful of a kid, and I didn't do that well academically in school, and all I wanted to do was do digital art stuff. So I think, you know, I think my parents were like very supportive. I think initially they wanted me to do something maybe a little bit more tech and hardware focused, but ultimately, you know, I think my parents really wanted to support me in whatever I wanted to do, even if it was artistically. They just kind of, I think they're hoping that I go into more of a commercial side of creativity, being like design, branding, or video games, or whatever it is. But yeah, a lot of women in both sides of my family have been kind of creatively inclined. So I think it is something that just kind of runs in our genes.
One thing that I find that's really unique, and it connects back to video games, and you had mentioned it before, is this sense of building worlds. And I think that's very apparent when you're setting out to create like a film or a movie. But when you're working and collaborating with a brand, obviously they've seen your work, or someone has seen your work and know kind of what they're getting into. What is the process like working with either the client or like the managing team of that brand to come up with this like world that you're building and this kind of whimsical nature that this product is kind of being showcased in?
I think I got very lucky where my clients want me to run with the work most of the time, because I tend to have a bit of like a distinct perspective when it comes to my work. When I get approached from work, a lot of the times it's like one of two scenarios. It's either they have no art direction, no nothing, and they're like, but we want to work with you, which I'm like, great, that's awesome. And then I may work with them to sort of develop, what are we trying to do here? And like, what kind of narrative are we trying to do? Or are we trying to be super whimsical and surreal? Things like that. Like I might be more in the art directional seat before we kind of hop into the CG work. Or the other sort of thing is, might be like an advertising agency. They might come to me and they have generally like a creative brief, you know, references, things like that. And I'll take the references and then just infuse whatever it is I whatever kind of like interesting or sort of quirky, I hate using the word quirky, but kind of like a weird kind of spin on things. And I think my clients have been really good about letting me run with things. So when it comes to process specifically, like I will just sketch things out really quickly just to kind of get a gut check feel on things, like literally just draw on the iPad or even a piece of paper. And just be like, this is what I'm thinking, like this kind of imaginative world, there's bamboo or whatever it is, piles of dumplings for Fly by Jing. And then we kind of go from there.
You had mentioned that you can kind of see that where culture is heading based on products and the products that are on the market currently. What are some of the products that you have in your fridge, and what does that say about how culture is maybe moving forward, and maybe how you're excited about that progress?
That's a really interesting question. I think probably the best example of this is I have a lot of non-alcoholic kind of spritzers and things like that in my, Gia or Avec. There's so many of the, so many drinks like that. And I don't think that's like the most cutting edge example necessarily, but for me personally, during the pandemic in 2020, I kind of stopped drinking. And then after doing that for a year, I was not able to bounce back to my advertising days level of tolerance. So, and also like, I'm like 35 now. So I'm not like as young as I used to be, where I can just like guzzle down alcohol and like go to work the next day. So for me, I have a lot of the non-alcoholic kind of seltzers or spritzers or mixers, things like that. And I think that's interesting. I think it's an interesting sort of signal on where kind of the younger generation is headed when it comes to like alcohol consumption and things like that. I think the numbers are skewing so much lower for them. And for me as well, I'm kind of like hopped on to that whole train because I can't handle a hangover anymore. Like I just can't. I like just one glass of like wine might just like make me feel like I was run over by like a dump truck the next day. Like I'm just not as like energetic as I used to be, I guess.
Well, it's like every other day there's like a new article or scientific piece of data that just like is like alcohol is worse than you thought. Like, you already knew it was kind of bad for you, but now all of the studies are kind of showing even more so. Congratulations on that change. The advertising world is definitely wild. I worked at a advertising agency in Boston, and there was a beer vending machine that was free. So you just like hit the number and like it would like give you the beer. And as an intern, like this was the greatest thing in the world, because you could be drinking at like, 4 or 3:30 on a Friday and no one gave a shit. And then my favorite thing is was being like a little buzz and then riding my bike through downtown Boston, because you felt fearless, like swerving through cars. That's not a great thing, and I don't recommend that to everyone, because that seems like a way to just end up dead on the sidewalk. But that's just my personal story with alcohol and advertising.
Yeah, I mean, I worked at an ad agency, Anomaly, first job straight out of school. And wow, was I able to drink. And they have like a Thirsty Thursday every Thursday, but like they have so many alcohol clients, there's alcohol everywhere. And as that agency got bigger and expanded, they just had like a bar. And then on Thursdays, it was like a bartender came in. It was just constant, like nonstop, just drinking. And yeah, it was like work hard, play hard sort of mentality.
Mm-hmm. This could be a good opportunity to talk about your life prior to working as a CG artist and how you made that pivot, and what was that journey from brand and design and advertising into this new life that you have now?
Yeah. So I graduated from SVA. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know really much about the industry at all. So my first job was at the ad agency Anomaly, and I was working on kind of upstream innovation work with a large consumer product brand. And I don't know. I love the people I worked with, but I was so burnt out. The hours and the partying were so crazy. And I was so young that I guess I left school with these like starry-eyed perspective on like how fun the industry was going to be. And I'd work on fun projects that I love. And I'm sure as I'm working in the industry, like that can get squashed like real fast once you really understand the business of creative and advertising and all of that, and like what actually pays the bills at an agency. So kind of like the level of corporate work that's expected of you. So I had done that for a year, really burnt out, really kind of unhappy and like depressed. I was like, I don't know if I'm cut out to be a designer and a creative. Like I hate this work. The hours are so long, all of that. So I quit my job. I had nothing lined up, but I was like, fuck it, it's fine. And there's one thing I've always done when I was younger was I've always found the cheapest place to live that I can. So I didn't have high rent. So it's not like I had high overhead. So I quit my job. I went to Japan for 2 weeks with my dad, and I was like, whatever, like I'll figure it out, I guess, when I come back. So came back from Japan, and I was really lucky that somebody that I had interviewed with at school, she was a CD at Mother, she just left and she joined Chobani, and she was just like, hey, do you want to come on board? We need a designer, a freelance designer. And I was like, okay, perfect. So that ended up like lining up. So I worked at Chobani for a few months, like I think probably about 10 months. And that's where I learned about like food art direction, that food photography was like a very singular practice, and that there were things like food stylists, like that was like a whole niche of a job in and of itself. And that job kind of like, I think when I was younger, in a weird way, I wasn't completely tapped into sort of the things that I loved. But from working in that job, I was like, oh, I love food. Like, I really love food. Maybe I can work within the food industry. So from there, as I was working through my like quarter life depression of being like, I don't know what I'm doing, and this industry is weird, and like, I don't know, my portfolio doesn't look good, blah, all those things that you worry about when you're younger. I started creating my own food content and food photography and food styling. And this was for Instagram back before Instagram was what it is today, where it's just like huge thing, before influencers and all of that. And from there, I ended up getting hired to work as a food stylist for Panera Bread, because they needed a food stylist that had like a graphic designer's eye, because they're doing these like heavily patterned kind of things at the time. So from there, I kind of hopped into like the food and photo industry, as well as being a freelance graphic designer. And I was jumping around from ad agency to ad agency. I would work shoots as well. And then, this is like super long, but I'll like get there eventually. But yeah, from there, it was just like, I don't know. I think when I was younger, it was just like a lot of kind of like, I felt like I didn't know what I was doing through like a majority of my 20s. So even though I was doing these like cool things, like working with Panera and like working on sets and stuff, I feel like I had no idea what the hell I was doing most of the time. So I'd been offered a full-time position with a brand agency at the time. It was called Brand Union, which quickly switched over to Super Union. I took a job there and I stayed there for 2.5 years, from like a senior level to an ACD level creative. And that's where I learned all my things I know about packaging, branding, strategy, all of that, how to give a good presentation, how to talk to like C-suite people, how to like build a deck, all of that kind of stuff. And then from there, like I'd quit, pandemic rolled around. I thought I had these grand dreams of like having like a design studio or a design practice. And then like the pandemic happened, and I mean, it's like everything just kind of shut down in 2020, and I had some packaging clients and we weren't able to get samples, supplies, anything from any manufacturers in China. Everything was shut down. So I had started using 3D as a tool to kind of visualize these products. And from there, I kind of like fell back in love with 3D. I had not touched it for a decade. And then that's what started this. And it was from there. I was so unsure about whether or not I actually wanted to transition to being a CG artist. Like I felt very emotionally conflicted about it. But over like the last 3 years, I made the slow transition into doing CG. And I will call it kind of like a transition because I fully left graphic design world in the process.
Do you find that that decision has now kind of been internalized and you're proud of it? Because it seems like how you described it, that slow transition, maybe it was hard to break free of certain identities that you had previously had, but now do you feel fulfilled and own that title?
Yeah, I feel like I own that title. I had to work for every single client for being able to transition. It was not easy. It was a lot of work. I was kind of lucky that it happened during the pandemic when it's almost like the world really slowed down. I felt like it gave me more time to, kind of transition out. So one of the things is like from working in an ad and branding agency, like what you really start to understand is your website and your portfolio is like your moneymaker. It's your calling card. You're most likely going to get hired to do more of whatever is in your portfolio. And as a freelancer, like I was very much aware of that, like big pattern throughout my entire career. So I'd spent all of 2020, 2021 creating this dream body of work, like just dream images, clients that I would want to work with. I just created this whole body of work. I was like very much kind of just kept myself in a bit of a bubble just so I can focus. And it was from doing that I was able to make the transition over. It was a lot of work, but for me, I think it was so worth it to be able to kind of switch everything in my life, like switch my career out.
You have a quote from Twitter here that I'll read. I'm equally exhilarated and exhausted by the amount of learning CG requires. It feels like each brief requires a varying dose of research, training, and testing.
Yeah.
What did you have to do during that period where you were kind of relearning after a decade? And where did you start? Because there may have been people online maybe doing a little bit of that, but was it all just diving in and kind of just getting your feet wet and just testing the programs and their new capabilities?
Yeah, that's essentially how it worked. I got Cinema 4D. I started just going on YouTube, looking for tutorials, things like that. And then following them and just kind of being patient while I was trying to connect the dots back, because it had been such a long time since I had touched anything in 3D that while the skills were there, it took a while to just come back. So I was watching things like iDesign, which is like EJ Hassenfras, and like I'm trying to think, like Vincent Schwank, like these CG kind of YouTubers, and that's how I got back into it, and that's how I like learned like render engines like Redshift. And then along the way, I also switched over to using like a PC tower for 3D just because it handles things a lot better than like a Mac.
Mm-hmm. Is there any kind of like particular, I guess, all-encompassing or like really like breakthrough moment that you could share with the audience who may be wanting to dive into this world, but maybe a little bit nervous, where would you start and what advice would you give to that person? So the younger version of you in this case.
I mean, the younger version of me, I would just tell myself to like, just do it. I think people have such a hard time just getting started. And this is something I've obviously struggled with. I'm not sure if it's something that you've also struggled with, but it's also kind of like, oh, is the work good? What are people going to think? Like all of that sort of stuff. Like, oh, it sucks. Like, it's like, just cut it out. Just like start somewhere, and you're just going to have to be patient and understand that like learning things and honing in on skills just takes time. So that would be like my number one advice. If you're interested in 3D, just do it. Do it in a way that's manageable for you. Like for me, I'm a big believer in having a personal creative practice that is not married to like your client work. I think you need a playground to kind of express whatever it is that you want to express. I think it's emotionally and spiritually like really important to do that for yourself. So one, it's like, how can you learn in a manageable way? Is it just an hour a day? Like you'll be surprised what you can learn in 2 weeks if you just spend an hour a day learning something. And then when it comes to learning, take a look on YouTube. There's just a plethora of resources now. And School of Motion, Motion Design School, there's like iDesign. He's really great. Polygon Pen, really great for modeling. And just give it a try. Join some Discord groups or Reddit. So you have a place where you can ask questions, because CG is difficult. Like sometimes these programs just like don't work when they're supposed to work a certain way. Like this is like a struggle my entire career of CG is like sometimes it just like doesn't work and you just like really don't know why. So it's really good if you have kind of like a group or like a community that you can ask questions with.
Beautiful. I think that'll probably really, really help someone who is like on the cusp of wanting to try this, either dabbling or like wants to be in this world. And I thought it was really interesting, and it makes perfect sense that you used to work as a food stylist, because I can see the connection from the kind of photography and styling world and how it kind of plays with the work that you're doing currently. And I find the angles that you choose, so like the fictitious camera and how like in the actual piece, so whether it's like pointing up or like it's down or like the particular angles, I find are really interesting and make your work stand out really, really well and have a unique spin. But also the additional assets or props, if you will, that kind of made food styling interesting for magazines, maybe from like the past decades, but we can do now with other programs if we wanted to kind of like inject it with more personality. There's a question. It's just long-winded.
Oh,
so just kind of seeing that where you came from to now, the question that I had for you is, how do you see photography changing with CGI becoming more popular?
yeah, I mean, I think the photo industry is really rapidly changing. I think, unfortunately, a lot of the change comes down to the fact that we have things like social media, and there's just such a crazy churn and burn of assets constantly. And, the thing with photography is it takes a crew of people to make really good images. And unfortunately, I'm finding, my partner is a still life photographer. So, this world is something that I am kind of, parallel to. The budgets aren't kind of matching the level of skill, talent, and work that it takes for photography, unfortunately. And I love photography. I think it's an industry that absolutely needs to be protected because we want to see products as they are. So, on the other hand, now there's CG, beauty, there's a lot of beauty CG and all of that. And I think there is sort of a shift away from photography into CG for, those sorts of products. And I think it is changing the landscape quite a bit. I think it's causing, photographers to move into new areas like video and directing more than, and as well as doing stills and things like that. But, when it comes to sort of photo versus CG, I think sometimes I get pinned as someone who's like stealing like photo jobs and things like that. And like, that's really not my intention when that comes to my work. I really want to create work that is illustrative. It lives somewhere between whimsy and illustration and realism. I don't want to be doing hyper realistic work. I don't ever think photography should be replaced with CG. Like, photography is super important in the design industry and creative industry. So I try and keep this balance of, you know, there might be a sense of realism to the work, but ultimately it's much more imaginative and kind of whimsical. So it's not kind of like just directly like, you know, as a replacement to photography.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would be duped by looking at your work or be like, oh, that's not the real packaging, or feel that kind of feeling. Well, I mean, like in certain cases, there's like butterflies like flying around your work, or it's like entangled in plants, and I'll put images on the screen so people have context. But it's living, coming back to what we had talked about earlier, it's in its own universe. And I feel like, yes, you can kind of craft that with photography. I mean, yes, you can, but it is reliant on your set dressing, what props you have. Do you have to make custom props? That's a whole different person or team that would have to do that to bring that universe together. So while I think like photography is essential as well, because it's like, it is what it is. You can make it look beautiful. You can make it look interesting. And there's probably even ways, like in how we've been doing for years, like taking photographs and then layering different things on top of them to create like a world or a universe as well. But it just like, it doesn't feel like you could be duped by looking at your work, or that it could be in its own category of taking photo jobs. I feel like it's, like you had said, akin to illustration in that regard.
You know, and one thing to add when it comes to kind of where the industry is shifting for photography, I think we're in an era right now where people want to see things that are like high impact visuals. They're like illustrative. They're like weird, you know, like I think that's very much what is in at the moment. So I think we're going to see a lot more sort of like illustration-esque kind of things in the product space. While for the past, you know, I would say like 5 years, we've been seeing like a very specific style of photography kind of dominating. I think we're gonna, you know, I think everything in creative design is like a little bit cyclical. I think we're moving into illustration, and then at some point it's gonna kind of, you know, sway back to photography and all of that.
Yeah, I like those kind of shifts in what we're seeing. It's definitely interesting because now it's like a combination of a lot of things. It's like the tapping into culture from like the 90s and the 80s. Like I would describe it as like high gloss, like high sheen, like everything's super shiny, or like there's like some sort of filter on top of like photography now that makes it feel like it's from an era prior. And then somehow mixing that with other elements makes it feel like now, which is really cool. So I love that cyclical nature and how it affects the creative industry and where it could go. And obviously we'll end up somewhere else in 10 years. But I always like to think about what are the things that never change. And it's just, there are certain cool factors that will never change that we always like as people. And it seems like some sort of touching or grasping at nostalgia, or just like basic principles, if you keep those tried and true, then like your work will always kind of be in vogue, if you will.
Yeah, I think so. I think if you know, I think tapping into the nostalgia is kind of a way of tapping into people's sort of like emotions, I think, with things that resonated with them as a kid. And I think that's really very much like what people want to see right now.
Besides photographers hitting you up in your DMs saying that you're stealing their jobs, are there any common misunderstandings about the type of work that you do, or with your clients? Do they think that it's something and then end up feeling like it's something entirely different? Let me see if I can rephrase that so it's an understandable question. I guess, like, what are some common misunderstandings people have with your work and how it's made?
There's quite a few things that I think what makes CG kind of distinctly different from photography. While in photography, you have a crew of people, you have a prop stylist, food stylist, they're kind of running around, and then you get on set and it's like you have only X amount of days to make those images. Like, that's it. The difference with CG is like, one, it takes a while because one, the product has to be modeled, and then it depends on kind of what the brief is, but everything surrounding that object also needs to be created. So, there's some things where you might be able to purchase stock models, things like that, but if you want something super distinct, like, that needs to be made. So that in that sense, I think for me, CG takes a lot longer than photography. I think when it comes to production, it's like you have like 1 to 7 days, whatever it might be, like, get the shots and then it goes into post-production. For CG stuff, it's kind of like, when my project specifically, I like to have ample time to do things. So I try and build in like month and a half, depending on what it is, maybe 2 months from start to finish with all the work. So I think that's one thing that I think clients and founders don't know about CG yet. I think they're all kind of catching on since CG is becoming so much more of a common thing now. And then when it comes to kind of, I think, misconceptions about pricing and things like that, I do think I get approached a lot by people who are looking at CG as something to replace photography and therefore should be cheaper than photography. But like I said, when it comes to the amount of time it creates for me to create imagery, it's going to be about the same, if not more, actually, a lot more, depending on what the client wants. So I think that's one thing that I have to talk through with clients sometimes. And then the other thing is also like the value that I personally put on my own work. I think I don't want my work to be seen as something that's like going to replace photography and should be cheaper. It's kind of like, no, like, if you want to work with me and you want kind of my perspective on things, like, I'm not going to push my kind of like my own budget down on my creative work.
Is that negotiation, have you found that shifting in a positive direction as time goes on? So like, say, obviously at the beginning, you're kind of green, you don't know how to exactly price things, but has that been an easier process moving forward? Or is it still kind of the same level of kind of misunderstanding and confusion and kind of having to negotiate and fight for your value?
I think I only want to work with clients that really want to work with me. So if I feel like, one, there's a few things. So if I get approached for work and they're showing me sort of like examples or references that are belonging to other CG artists or other illustrators, and they're kind of wanting me to replicate that kind of style, I'm going to automatically say no, because they should just hire the artist they're swiping for, because the work's going to look better and it's going to be easier. Like, it's really difficult if you have me do something that's like super out of my style. So that's like one thing I'll immediately funnel out, just because that's a headache for me and that's going to be a headache for the client ultimately. So I'm really looking for clients that are coming to me, maybe they're referencing past work that I've done already. So then, already there's kind of a level of, I think, trust and like interest in my work. And I find that those clients tend to be a lot easier. I think I've also I think after you've worked in the creative industry for a certain amount of time, you get a little bit like I don't want to say jaded, but you get so worn down from like the bullshit that some people will throw at you. I'm kind of like, if your budget is too low, I'm not like, and maybe you're not being nice about it or whatever it is, like, I'm very much just going to be like, I don't think we're going to be able to work together. Like, I don't think I have to say yes to every job. And I do that also for my own mental sanity. I really try and just figure out what their budget is and how much they're actually expecting to spend. And then I'll kind of think about, does that range work for me? Does it need to be higher? Do I really want to work with them? And that's sort of how I choose my clients.
I think that's beautiful. That's smart. And are there any other particular red flags that you pick up on like super quick?
I think those are mostly it. I mean, it's like if they have other artist stuff, if the budget is just like inhumanely low, I get these every once in a while where I'm like, that it's
Like
kind of like when
$200.
someone's like, we can pay you $200 an image. I'm like, are you serious? I'm like, I can't work with that. That's crazy. Like, I like, like it's like I'm gonna burn that through that budget in just like a day of working, basically. So if anyone comes in, and this is like a separate whole other rant that I can go on about the design industry. There's some brands, they're big brands, they're not big brands, but they're well-known kind of like CPG brands and things like that. And some of them reach out with just like work that's priced even lower than editorial work. And I find editorial work to kind of be the lowest budget work that I will happily take on because the creative and concepts are so good. Sometimes you just get these brands that come through, they're really lowballing you. It's really disappointing to see because they might be products that I actually really love. I just try and like take note of it. I try and tell them what a realistic range would be for me and why, and just kind of like leave it at that. It's disappointing, but
I guess it's just that open communication and honesty. Well, honestly, just like saying, hey, I'm a person on this other side. I do this for a job. I have to pay my own insurance, my own rent, food. Like, this is a career for me. It has to be logistically possible. And this budget doesn't work for this particular need that I have. So being open and honest with that, I think, is essential.
Have you ever said that to a client?
I say things in maybe a less direct way over email. I have like pre-canned answers that I have like for when something's way too low, or like if I know they're just like trying to find, usually it's like they're looking for 3 quotes, and it's like I'll say things like, am I the last bid because you're talking to other gigantic agencies and already have a choice picked out and you just need this quote to go back to your boss? So I've said things like that. And it's just like, if that's the case, I have no interest in kind of like pitching for this project or giving you a quote, like respectfully, cheers, like things like that. I think you have to be honest and fight for your right. And like, I'm a people pleaser. My wife would tell you that for sure. And I don't want to get into a fight. I think that like it's a learned skill to kind of fight for your value, because I want to do the work. I want to like make them happy with the work that I'm providing. I do find that it's like a little bit of a negative quality, but it also makes us really strong as creative individuals. But there comes a point where you're just like, no, I need to make rent. I need to be able to save money so that I have goals down the road, whether that's like a house or kids or whatever. Like, you got to plan for shit. So like being paid what you're worth is essential.
Yeah, I've actually, like, I think I've gotten spicier over the years, where now I will say I live in a high cost of living city. This doesn't even cover my rent. Like, I will just straight up say that now, because a lot of the times people who are reaching out to me live in New York City. They probably know how much rent costs here. So sometimes I would just say something like that. Doesn't cover my rent, doesn't cover my health insurance as a freelancer, which is astronomical. And yeah, I mean, maybe they just didn't think about it that way, but maybe they should.
Yeah, and that could be like the reality check that they need. Like, oh shit, maybe I should think about this and value it a little bit more. Yeah. It's like one thing if you're like, okay, I'm doing this for a friend or like a pro bono project or a charity, or, you know, insert whatever kind of rules or guidelines you have for like when you take low budget projects. And generally, if I'm taking a low budget project, I'll try to weasel in like, we have creative control. We're going to show you something, and that's basically it.
I think that's the way to do it. Like, I take on, I take on a lot of different tiers of budgets. A lot of it comes down to me. It's just like, oh, is this like really exciting? Or am I trying to move my work into this direction? And is this project like a really good way of doing it? Like, I will take that work. I like working with people who just trust, who have like good trust. They're like open and collaborative and just want to make really good work. Because a lot of the times, like, I'm going to be honest, like some of the high paying jobs that I've done aren't the most fun. They're not the most beautiful. There's a lot of stakeholders when you work with big businesses. And it's really like the small jobs that I was like, made no money on, really, that like end up becoming these things that people really love, and it gets shared around, or you know, it might bring in other clients for me.
How do you distinguish between your personal work and the work that you do to kind of attract these next generation of clients that you're working for? And how do you kind of maintain that sacred space? You had mentioned that it's like a spiritual act, kind of making work for you to kind of enrich your soul. What is that type of work that you're doing, and what does that look like?
So I feel like when it comes to me and my creative work, personal work, it's a really important practice for me. Typically, it happens really early in the morning before I start my client work. That's like me time, when I get to make new things. I get to like maybe learn a new feature within the program, like things like that. And you know, I say it's kind of this like spiritual thing, because I think a lot of us who are creatives, like we probably started at a young age, we may or may not have, but we have this sort of drive and love of making things. I think a lot of us might consider our careers like callings in a way. And I think that when you try and fulfill this sense of purpose and calling by your client work, you're going to feel like you're getting burned, because, you know, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of pieces that play the client work. It's not full freedom a lot of the time. Sometimes it is. So I think, you know, if I know this kind of practice doesn't resonate with everyone, but I feel like if it resonates for you, protect this time for yourself to make whatever it is that you want to make, because I think there's this like level of joy and like happiness and like fulfillment that comes from making what things that like actually really matter to you. And I know so many people I went to school with that kind of like, they lose their spark at some point because they're putting all of their sense of fulfillment on their corporate creative job or their ad job or studio job. And there's so you know, these jobs are so complicated. So when it comes to like stuff that I want to do, a lot of the times, like I might be doing research on a project, whether that's on Arena or Pinterest, or just like going through things. And I find like, I'm a very visual person. So I might find an image of like a really interesting like flower in nature with raindrops. So I might see that. I might be like, oh, that's cool. Like we'll stash that away for something else. Or I see someone, you know, like someone else's work and they're doing something like really interesting and it's like speaking to me, I'll stash that away. And when I take inspiration from other people, it's not about ripping them off, but sometimes like you look at someone else's work and you're like, oh, that's like really cool. Like I have this idea for, you know, so I kind of try and implement like beginner's mind. It's kind of like what I think makes kids so brilliant, you know, like they just do what they want. They like do, you know, and I try and kind of like bring that level of like beginner's mindset with my own personal work. So I might like wake up one morning and I'll be like, I just want to try this like floral simulation. So I'll just start making it and just tinkering with it for a few hours in the morning. Maybe I finish it. Maybe I go to the next day and I finish it. But, you know, once you start creating those sorts of things, like I get this high level of satisfaction. And a lot of times, like this work ends up also being kind of fascinating to potential clients. So then they'll reach out and be like, hey, can you create this? And ultimately, I want to be in the driver's seat of my work in my career. I don't want it to be kind of guided by the demands of the industry necessarily. Like I want to make what I want to make and get paid to do it. So I really protect that time for myself.
There's so many thoughts, but we'll stick to the most recent one. And I found that like personal work often influences your paid work. So like you're practicing, you're trying new things, you're learning all this stuff, and then it just gets dumped into like maybe your next project or your next project or your next project. Yeah. And it just like, oh, if I didn't learn that, then I couldn't have ever made this.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is like really cool ideas made by other people that you get inspired by. It's often that you can't replicate it the same way that they're doing it because you don't have their life experience. You don't have their perspective. So it's like the dexterity of learning it, but then you're also just like infusing it with all of your like life lessons, experiences, your skill set at the time. And then it becomes something completely different. And I think those are like really magic moments where you're like, oh, I want to do something like that, but I have no idea how to do it. So it came out like this, which is also very cool.
I love that. I think you put that beautifully. I think that's exactly what it's about.
The other thing that I really like that you had mentioned is just like, you had mentioned like kind of having no rules or stakes on your own personal work. And I think that is the thing that leads to not burning out, which is what I think a lot of people in this industry, like you had said, they lose their spark because they're burnt out, because they're putting all of their self-worth sometimes into kind of creating work for others and not themselves. But having that safe place where you kind of own it and you can do whatever the heck you want with no one telling you what to do is beautiful. I think that's really magical and fulfilling and brings back that childlike essence, which you had mentioned before.
Yeah.
What is your standard tool list? What is your go-to tool, or does that change constantly?
So my go-to tool for years and years is Cinema 4D. I've been using it before Cinema 4D was what it is today. I feel like back in the day, nobody took it seriously, but it's now turned into this like powerhouse of a program. So Cinema 4D is kind of like my true love. And it's really my go-to. It's like I can think in 3D because I've used that program so much. And then when it comes to rendering, I use Redshift. There's a bunch of engines out there. I also use Octane. It depends on what I'm rendering. If I'm doing glass and specular material, I'll use Octane. Everything else, for the most part, I use Redshift. Photoshop, super important. I do a lot of post-production on my work, color correction and all that kind of stuff. And then I might use ZBrush. So that's a sculpting program. So if I'm making food, I might choose to sculpt it so it feels really like organic and slouchy and all of that. And then occasionally I use things like Marvelous Designer, which is a fabric simulator. It's very powerful. If I'm doing drapey things, I might use that program. And then obviously like After Effects. If I'm putting together my animations, doing some, weird post kind of work. And I think that's it for the most part.
Do these things work together, or are you kind of like rendering and then putting it into something else? And then, so like say you're doing like a fabric and then you're are you bringing that into Cinema 4D and then working on it there? How does that work?
So when it comes to the render engine, like Redshift and Octane, they're all now like plugins that you can use within Cinema 4D. So I don't have to move out of anything. And then the same thing with ZBrush. So ZBrush is now owned by the same company that owns Cinema 4D. It's called Maxon. So the integration is relatively seamless. Like I could be using a Cintiq tablet sculpting something, and then I can just shoot this model straight into Cinema 4D. So there's a lot of integration between these things now that makes my life a lot easier. I think Marvelous Designer, that's the one program where it's not as seamless of an integration. I just have to kind of export something and then re-import it into Cinema 4D and then, do my edits and all of that. But generally speaking, I think these tools have become really streamlined. So you don't have to do too much like take it out of here, bring it into there, all of that.
When you were saying like the list of tools, I was like, oh my gosh, that's a lot to handle and deal with on any given day. I just know some like nightmare stories where our designer will be like rendering something overnight and it'll like crash his computer.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have just like the best PC possible with like the best cooling fan in order to kind of render these gigantic things?
Yeah, like I really love computers. I learned like when I was younger, I built like my first computer when I was about 14. So it's something that like I like hardware, I like products, I like tech and stuff like that. I built my computer, I want to say like a year and a half ago. So I have like a dual GPU system. I have like a 4090 and a 3090 GPU running together and a pretty good motherboard and CPU and all of that. I personally I believe in investing in your equipment. Some of this comes from my partner who's a photographer, where they spend like photo equipment's like very expensive, but he has this kind of ethos of like, invest back into your career. And I'm like, okay, like let's go to B&H then. I'm gonna buy a new computer or whatever. So I do invest quite a lot in my equipment personally, because you can use what's called like a cloud, like a, cloud rendering or things like that. You shoot your file out to a service that's going to render it out for you. For me, with the way that I work, I like to have sort of a rapid preview of what I'm working on. So I prefer to invest in my PC so that it's pretty high powered, that I don't have to shoot my work out all that often. And I can I do this thing where I call like, I'm babysitting my renders. So like the render is running and it's like on my computer, and I might just like be doing errands or house stuff, and then I'll just like pop in and be like, is it okay? Like, I like being able to do that, because sometimes when you shoot it out to another service, if a plugin failed or if a texture failed or you didn't link things properly, you might have spent like a couple $100 to get something back, and you're like, fuck, like that thing is black because the texture is missing and things like that.
This is maybe jumping back to where we just were with personal creative practice, but how do you draw a line in the sand between like, okay, I've worked enough, I love what I do, but I need time and space for everything else, including mental health. So I think that's another important part, because our job is our job and our life is our life, and they should work in harmony and synergistically together. So what are the things that you're doing to refresh yourself and making sure that your mental health is key so that you can go into each day, I guess, top notch, ready to go?
I mean, I think that's the thing I'm trying to constantly figure out for myself. I don't know if I'd love to hear what you're doing to keep yourself sane. For me, like, it was like my creative work is like my life, and I think I'm not that interesting if you took that away, because that's like kind of all that I do. So, I try and give myself rest days if I need it. Luckily, I'm self-employed, so I don't have to work a very set schedule. I can decide not to work certain days. So I try and give myself that freedom to take a break. I also do like mindfulness practices. Like I try and meditate like 20 minutes at least a few times a week, sometimes longer, because like I love what I do. And I think it's because I love what I do that I can easily just like overdo it. And then, that causes like, and then it's like really hard to like shut your brain off sometimes. Like my anxiety can be super high because I'm like worried about a deadline, or the fact that I haven't cracked like the creative yet. Like that sort of stuff drives me absolutely like insane. Like I just like stress about it and I think about it. So I think it's really important to figure out for an individual, like what is it that's going to help you put a little bit of space between you and your work at certain points in time. For me, meditating, I try and go out and see friends, things like that. Like I'm constantly looking for something to refresh me. And like, as far as like the way that I work hard and focused really early in the morning. I finish up work typically around like 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and then I have to do something else in the afternoon, or else I might just be like ruminating, and then I'm not reset the next day, and it just like snowballs into a full-blown burnout.
When you say early morning, are we talking like 5 or 6? When's the start point, and then is 3 the cutoff, or do you kind of jump back in like after you've done something else, like say go for a walk, or I don't know, worked out or something for X amount of hours after that? I saw the face that worked out.
No. So when what typically happens is it's like maybe 6 or 7 in the morning, kind of depends on when I wake up. Some seasons I'm up earlier than others. So it's like that early in the morning, and typically I'll drink caffeine, whatever, to kind of like pep up, and then I go straight into my work. And then by the time you hit 3, I mean, you've been working for a while. So kind of like, like my day's my brain's just done. Like I just hit a point where I can't keep pushing. So it's rare for me to hop back into work later, just because my brain's like, my brain can't handle it. Like I can't focus. I can't take in new information. Like afternoon for me has to be things that are mindless. If I'm still working, it has to be mindless or just like easy, like I'm just monitoring something.
Yeah. And think like I love hearing about people's kind of like breakdown of their day. Mine is a little bit chaotic right now. I'll get up. Well, I haven't been good about it. I haven't been getting up at 6. I've been getting up at like 6:45 and then not getting out of bed until 7. But generally a typical day, I'll try to like get up at 6. I'm like trying to plan my day at like 7:30, and then like 8 I'll start work like a full day, like make dinner, work out, reverse the order, work out, make dinner, like have time with my wife or like out doing whatever. And then like because of this podcast, I'll like jump in and like make people's like YouTube thumbnails or like design around like whatever that process is, like, and then edit these things at night. So I'll go until like midnight. That's not every night, but then it's like a couple times a week I'll do that. Or Saturday mornings when my wife is teaching dance, I'll like have it playing in the background, editing on Premiere, stop it when like someone says something silly, which is always just me just rambling or talking about the weather for no reason. And so that's like a typical like day. But that's just to set the stage for what am I doing to, which you had asked, like you're curious what I'm doing in the same way to kind of cultivate mental health. I think I'm the worst at it, but I do like the hustle and the grind and I like what I do, but I do think that I like feel it in my body physically. Like I'll wake up and I'm like not excited. And that's when I know like, oh, I've gone too far. So I'll know that I need to kind of like do something fulfilling to me. So generally that'll be like taking a walk and getting coffee. That's like my guilty. It's like not guilty. It's my pleasure is like getting coffee and like luxuriating that I didn't make it myself. It's like, oh, what a treat. Like as a poor college student, that was like the thing I could never buy. It's like all I want. Financial freedom to me is like buying a latte whenever I want. That's when I made it. So that's a big thing. Exercise, I find that like movement gets me like in a mood that's like, let's say 10 to 20% better than where I was when I started. So that's the reason I do it. It's not for like the strength gains or like anything that's like very bro-y. It's more just like I find for mental and physical health and longevity. And then I think like these conversations I think are really rewarding because like maybe we never would have crossed paths, but this is such like a gift and a pleasure to do this and just meet amazing people and just like shoot the shit and learn about like what fuels them up.
I find these sort of conversations really energizing to speak with other creatives and find out like how are they doing what they're doing? Like how are you balancing your work and your life? Because I think so much of us are just like, you know, like we're so enmeshed. I'm like so inspired to hear that you like do your day job and then you come back and do the podcast. I'm like, wow, am I being productive enough these days?
Well, that's the thing I don't want to spread is like you got to figure out for your own life. It's like I know that there will be a point in which I would like to pivot to delegate the editing or like streamline the process. Right now, I haven't figured that out, but I am all for delegating and passing off things so that you can focus on like, I don't know, your zone of genius, whatever like really fuels you up and like that you get lost in and you get, I guess, into that flow state. Like that's the stuff that I think you should be doing more of. For me, it's like I when I'm like building a brand or a website and I get like lost in it and I have like my headphones in and like nothing is distracting me. Like those are like glorious moments. Like those are like why I chose to do this career and what kind of keeps me going. But then you get stuck in the other stuff, which is like, oh shit, like the client wants this change or this revision or the scope of work. I have to push back on this now. And then there's the timelines or deadlines and it just becomes like unfun and you have to like reel yourself back in. That's the balance of it all.
I think I love what you said about being in a flow state because I think that's actually the one thing that I chase after the most in my life, much more so than being like, I landed this like big client, like it was big budget. What I'm actually constantly chasing that like excitement, connection to your work, that you just like lose time and you're in a flow state. Like to me, that is like the best feeling ever, because it's like this mixture of just like feeling really excited, but you also have like this really nice sense of clarity while you're working, when you're in your flow state. And I think for me, like, and it sounds like it might be for you as well, like it connects back to this feeling of like having a mission and like being on your purpose. That
Definitely it connects back to that, like, oh, I feel like I'm doing what I meant to do. But it's also like when you just lose track of time as like a kid, it makes me feel that way again. When I would just like draw, like, I would just like try and copy like scenes from like manga, and I would just like be drawing for hours and then trying to make my own characters and then playing on Flash and being horrible at animating, but like just would have so much fun in the process. I find it does connect me back to that. And I loved how you like focus intentionally trying to connect back to like things from your childhood or your culture or this kind of the worlds that you're creating. And that I strive for that more and more, where I'm just like, I'm so done with trying to be like the serious designer who like, but now I'm just like, I want to be me and just like have a normal life and connect it to the things that I love, which is usually like Dungeons and Dragons and like all sorts of like, yeah, like whatever nerdy things that I'm like super obsessed with at the time.
So, you know, when I was younger, I felt the same way, where I was like, oh my gosh, there's like these really successful like brand identity designers, and they're like at Pentagram and they're doing like really cool things. Like I want to be like them. I want to have a career like them. But I think what I kind of figured out, I wish I figured this out earlier, was like to be successful, quote unquote, I think it really comes down to being yourself. Like it sounds so cliche when you say shit like that, like just like be yourself. No, really, like that really actually is what I think the key to success or, you know, fulfillment is. It's like tapping into these things that like make you feel alive, that are very much unique to you. Like if you actually look at people who have done really interesting things with their careers, that's how they've done it a lot of the times. Like they have some like true passion and interest in this one thing. Maybe it's like in kind of a niche industry, and they just go for it. So that's kind of my, like, if I could give advice to the younger version of myself, like I would tell them that, like, really it's about like being very much authentic to you and your interests and the things that you love, and that is going to bring you so-called success.
Because it doesn't really matter what creative industry you're in, if you have that direct perspective and personality, people are going to want that because it's unique, and it's not just like a job where you're copying someone else's style in order to try and achieve like a dumbed down version of what they could do if they just only hired that person.
Yeah, and I would love to also, I'd love to like build on that specific kind of to the CG industry, that I don't necessarily think you have to have like a super tight visual perspective. If you are like a very technical kind of CG artist, like your thing is that you know like a program like Houdini in and out, and you can create almost anything that a client might come to you with a brief for, like that's also super legitimate. Like I think sometimes like it's not necessarily just all about the aesthetics of the work you create. Sometimes it's really purely about this like high level skill that you have. So if like there's anybody out there who's just like, maybe they don't feel like they're necessarily somebody who just wants to create something super stylistic, if you have a really like niche, unique like skill set because you love whatever technical craft it that you're doing, that's also super valuable.
Yeah, 100%. I guess it's like any skill is like marketable if you put your mind to it, I guess.
Depends on whatever it is. It's like, again, being yourself, like depends on whatever kind of unique thing that you really have a passion for.
Yeah, and I guess like the thing to note is that we all have it. It's just the hard process is going through life and trying to find it and really inherently lock it down and say, okay, these are the things that I can probably lean into a bit more.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think one of the things that I do say is just like, stop listening to other people. Like,
Mm.
you need to listen to yourself, because a lot of people are going to give you a lot of advice that's going to be based on their life experience. But I think as creatives, we have to be able to listen to ourselves, and we have to be able to kind of, I think deep within us, we all have kind of some sort of sense of like a higher wisdom or higher knowledge of what we're truly trying to like, we're truly connected with. And I think you have to listen to that. And I think some people really struggle listening to that, because maybe their parents are saying one thing, or their friends only think this one way of being is valid and cool or whatever. But I think, you know, if there's one thing, again, like I'm saying, like, what would I tell my younger self? I would say that you have to just like listen to yourself.
I think we can all do a better job of that, me included. Like when I get caught up in like the bullshit and I'm like, their work is so much better. And I'm like, how do I do that? But it's like, well, maybe you just shouldn't. It seems like your dad is very concerned about AI taking your job. What would you say to comfort your dad?
So it was funny. So I went to see my dad for Thanksgiving, and it wasn't even like, I want to say within 2 minutes, like I literally just stepped into his condo and he's just like, Haruko, aren't you worried AI is going to take your job away? I was like, oh my God, Dad, come on. Like, give me some slack. I don't know what I can say to really comfort my dad, because I have no idea where AI is going. I mean, it to me, it just feels like this thing that just like came onto the scene like out of nowhere a little bit. Maybe I just haven't been like tapped in enough, but it just feels like all of a sudden came within like maybe end of last year or so. And then now it's just this like gigantic thing that's moving and shifting and growing, and, you know, like who knows where it's going. So like, as far as AI goes, you know, I think we're in just this time of transition in the world where we're having this like new thing that's going to help make our lives easier, I think, in some ways, but it's still super unclear in what ways it's going to be implemented in. So, I mean, I would just say to like my dad, I'll just be like, you know, like AI can't do everything for us. There has to be human touch, and everything we do as creatives is, you know, building brands, things like that. You have to have the human touch, or else it's not going to be relatable and it's not going to feel like creative. So I always think, you know, like, I think the ability to concept based on what's going on in the world among people and society, like, I don't think that's ever going to go away. So that's the only comfort I can give my dad, and be like, I think creatively, Dad. So if AI takes over, I guess I'm going to be directing AI. That, or I'm going to completely leave like digital art and try and like paint again or something.
Oh,
like,
there you go.
leave like digital stuff. Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah, fuck you, robots. I'll get Yeah, I guess my AI plan is to start a coffee shop, like either a coffee shop on wheels, or because I live in Cape Cod, so like a beach town. So I would probably just try to like get a coffee cart, like how Blank Street has like a one in each park. I'll just try to get one on each beach and try to make my money that way.
I mean, I feel you. I feel like we're so digital now. It's overwhelming, the amount of like images that are thrown our way. Like, there's a part of me, I recently adopted a cat, and there's a part of me that's like, maybe because I built so many other people brands, I'll be like, I'm going to create like a line of cat furniture that like actually looks good, because in a place like New York City, you live within and on top of everything. Like, their cat furniture could be better. And I was like, I'll render it. I can create a logo and a brand. So, you know, maybe that's where my life is going to end up. It's like making actual physical things, using 3D to help build and visualize it, but not digital visuals may not be like the end all be all. I don't know.
That's amazing. A personalized, I guess, line of cat products. That's so cool.
I don't know. Who knows?
What else have you learned from your experience of recently getting a cat? What has that done for your life?
I mean, it's really changed my life because, like, I have to get up in the morning and my cat is, like, demanding to be fed. He's meowing right outside of the door because he's kind of like, where'd you go? Like, he wants to play all the time. So I think my biggest learning from adopting a cat is how to break up my day so that I can get what I need to get done, but also take care of this creature that has like feelings and needs and things like that. And I think it helps me kind of take a break from my day to take care of someone else, which I think has been good for me.
There is something inherently valuable about not being so self-focused and having to take care of something else.
I haven't had a cat before. I've grown up with dogs, but I think there's this thing of like, they're like, cats are really independent. And I'm like, but they're kind of not at the same time because they like really want to play with you. And it's like, you give them all these toys and that's not enough because there isn't a hand, you know, flipping the wand around or whatever. So yeah, I feel like, you know, this past couple of months, I've been trying to build out more of like, what is my personal life? Because I've been so work focused, especially this year in particular. So it's nice to kind of take a step back, have a companion in my apartment that I like feed and I have to play with, or else he's going to get too energetic at night. And that's not good either. It's been good for me. Yeah.
I feel like we kind of have pivoted into like the fun, fast questions territory.
Okay.
So what else outside of work are you doing to kind of fuel yourself up creatively?
I mean, you know, I'm in a phase of moving out of burnout at the moment. So I'm going to be really honest. I'm also trying to figure out what that is. Because, you know, I think it changes every once in a while. Right now, similarly to you, I run. That really helps kind of like snap me out, reset my brain, exhaust me, and stop ruminating. I love cooking. So that for me is like a really nice break to just like make a nice meal, sit down, and just like chill out and things like that. I also love spending time with like friends because that helps me kind of break out of being so in my own mind and in my own world. And I feel like that's it. Like I've tried to pick up hobbies recently, like painting, like abstract stuff, and that's just not it. So I'm still trying to like, I'm actively trying to figure out like what I need.
What are you, I guess, what are your go-to things that you cook? Like what would a standard meal look like, or maybe a special meal look like?
I feel like my cooking tends to be, it's kind of Japanese influenced, but it also can be heavily Chinese influenced because throughout the years, I grew up around a lot of like Chinese friends and family, you know, and my ex was also who I was with for a very long time. I learned a lot of Chinese cooking from his mom. So it might be something like, I love a steamed fish. So it's like you steam a fish with ginger and scallions and you put like a specific sauce on top and you just eat that with rice. Like I love things like that. I also love just like really simple things like a nice egg with like chili oil on it. And yeah, things like that. And that tends to kind of, you know, making these like nice meals for myself isn't necessarily about like the complexity of it, but it's more about just making something that is like exciting and I feel like I'm just like, that's just enticing for me. And that can change, you know, from time to time.
Looking at your pantry of kind of food items that you grew up with as a kid and how it informed your love of packaging today. Could you share that story and how you kind of fell into this love of packaging?
So I grew up in sort of if you looked at my fridge, it was a mix of Japanese things and American items. So very Japanese things like Calpico, certain brands of miso, Kikkoman things like soy sauce brands, things like that. It very much like Japanese home pantry staples. But then we also had other things like very American, like Heinz ketchup, and my dad drank Budweiser. Like we had this like mashup of two things in our pantry. And I think I didn't realize like how emotionally connected I am to these items until I started living on my own. And I didn't have the same access to items like that. And then not having easy access to specifically Japanese condiments made me miss it a lot. And, I think in Japan, there's this very specific kind of design language that they have, especially because it's characters and it's not so much, like the American alphabet or the English alphabet. And I don't know, it's like that. There's just like this emotional tug that I have with certain condiments. And, realizing that, I also realized that a lot of other people have like an emotional connection to these things. And I just wanted to make art around that because I was really fond of these like condiments. And I kind of, in a weird way, wanted to create work that around these products that you can almost like print and hang up as art in your home for some reason. It was just a strange drive that I had to do this. So I created like a series of like chrome condiments, but I'm like, I think I lost track of what the question was, but I think ultimately when it comes to these things, like we have such an emotional connection to them, but they're so mundane. Like you wouldn't really think twice about a jar of Skippy or, Jif or things like that. But then once you actually see it like presented in kind of this interesting, artful way, you're like, oh my God, I love that. And that's the thing. I'm kind of chasing after that. Like I love getting that reaction.
I'm curious what your drink of choice is. It doesn't have to be alcohol. You've already established that you've given that up. So curious what your drink of choice is.
I mean, I feel like it's so basic, but I love seltzer. So LaCroix mango is kind of my go-to. I always have it in my fridge. It's kind of like my afternoon pick-me-up.
I feel the same way. I'm like a pamplemousse boy myself. That's the LaCroix that I always get. We'll keep it one more food related and then I'm going to do a hard pivot. But what would your death row meal be?
Oh.
You only get one meal left. So it'd be a hodgepodge of anything.
It's probably, there's a spot out here called Xi'an's Famous Foods. I'm not sure if you've tried it before, but they're lamb chili oil noodles. That would 100% be like my last meal. It's like so heavy and it's like so decadent. Like that's what I would want.
Wow. When I come back to New York sometime soon, that's where I'm going.
Yeah, it's great. It's so greasy. I love it.
Sounds incredible. Is there a particular book or movie or show that has changed you as a person?
There's a few books, actually. I find anything written by Stephen, I think it's Stephen Pressfield. So he wrote the War of Art, The Artist's Journey, Turning Pro. All of those books have really changed my perception of my work and the way that I work. And then the other one is The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. Amazing book. If there's one person in this world who I think just gets it, like gets what it is to be an artist and express yourself, it's him. Like his podcast, his book, everything, just it's worth like reading.
So some of your answers have been very Rick Rubin-esque. They've been very like Rick Zen.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. I think he just gets it.
Has been like super influential, and I feel like it's something that I need to revisit sometime in the near future, just to maybe shape like what the coming into the new year. I think it's a good time to revisit that. What is important to me as an artist? Keeping myself motivated. How do I want to shift the studio or anything in my life to kind of reinforce the work and life balance? Which I think those two books do a really, really good job of identifying being an artist, putting in the work, but kind of respecting the process.
Yeah, totally. I completely agree with you. I feel like I need to reread it again as well.
I always like to flip the script and ask if there's anything that you wanted to ask me.
Yeah, I would love to hear how you started your business. Like what caused you to go independent and then, open up a larger working studio, and how have you been able to manage it?
Pure stubbornness. No, I'll happily tell the story. I don't know if I've even shared it, but I was working in Boston at an agency for about 1.5 years, fresh out of school. And I wasn't in love with the client work, and I wasn't in love with kind of the growth that well, the growth had stopped. So it was at a point where I needed to pivot and try to figure out my next move. And I got a job as a interface designer working with this company that does like museum exhibits. So it was all like digital interfaces for these exhibits. And it sounded like it was going to be
I have to close the door.
the cat attack. But so it was supposed to be like 40 hours of work, but I was getting like 8. And I was like, shit, well, I can't really live off of this. So I ended up just kind of going full freelance after the fact. And I was like trying to find jobs, and I needed to move to New York because my girlfriend, now wife, was there. So we were trying to find a place together, and trying to make the move from Boston. And it just didn't work like out how I was planning it. I was assuming I would be able to find an amazing job at a studio in New York, and no one would hire me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just like, okay, well, now I have to figure out something else. And I had a body of work from like just making shit and putting things on Dribble. And I found that I reached out to a million studios and kind of got my foot in the door just like as a freelance, like hired gun. And so it was like 80% of my work was working with other agencies. But as the years went on freelancing, so this was like 2 years in, I started noticing that it was maybe like a 50-50 split of direct client work to working with agencies. And then I was just like, what if I don't work with agencies anymore? Because I don't really like the process of working with agencies. I haven't had a great relationship with many of them, but some have been great. So I can maybe just work with those guys and keep it as a steady source of income and make this pivot. And then it was like a couple months later, COVID happened. Of course, so it was just like, I had my savings, I was burning through some of my savings, and it was like a 6-month process until like I got a couple new clients. So it was a sad time, but it was just like doing whatever work possible to pay the bills and contribute. Because I had moved to New York, we had a high cost of living, but like needed to do what I had to do. And then now it's just to the point where the name is kind of stuck. We get clients. I don't know exactly how I find them. I do track it, like whether it's from like winning awards or like on Dribble. Still, there are some clients that come in the inbound kind of inbox that way. And I think it really is just like the desire to keep doing it and keep making work. So whether it's like passion projects or putting out our new website or just like trying to attract like-minded individuals. So a lot of passion projects, a lot of like extracurriculars like this, and just trying to engage with the community. I found that that is a way that I've been able to stay in the game.
Amazing. I mean, I feel like it's really interesting that you had this sort of pandemic shift. I feel like in a weird way, a lot of people kind of through the pandemic sorted a lot of kind of their career out in a weird way. I think maybe it brought some clarity to a lot of people about, I think, what matters and what we're like chasing after in life, I think.
Yeah. And now the thing is just like not losing that, because it shouldn't be like a global pandemic that gets us to slow down and think about what we truly want. And I think that sometimes it can be easy to like numb our feelings with like watching Netflix or like other things instead of like doing the work and like thinking about it. But that's something I try to be cognizant of.
Is there anything you want more of in 2023 with your business, whether that's a certain type of industry or if you're looking for maybe a certain type of client?
I think in 2024, I would like, what year is it in? It doesn't matter. Time marches on. In 2024, I think I would like to just work with, like, the startup game kind of got hurt a little bit because VC funding slowed down. But I would like to work with kind of like kind of coming up brands and maybe adopt like a model that is more like, hey, we're going to help you build this brand, but we're going to be like actual like partners. And so maybe it would be like a mindset of like, it's like not all about the money, but it could be about some equity, and we do like more work and kind of do more of the building process and get on the ground floor with them. And like, if the company is something that's exciting to me, it's only about like, what are you building? Why do you want to build it? Why does it matter? Is anyone else doing it? Cool. If we answer those questions and I feel good about you as a founder, like, let's work together. That's generally what I'm most excited about. So people like that.
I think it's helpful to see your business as working long-term with your clients, because as I've worked with founders, or I used to ask founders quite a bit, like, what is your number one pain point when it comes to the creative or working with an agency and things like that? And I think a lot of it is, you know, some of it is like, after you hand off the brand, then how do we implement it? Like, how do we go about, like, do we bring in an in-house designer, but like, how do we train them to work within the system? Like, how do we even find them? And then, you know, moving on to even larger scope things, from when you go from being a startup and having a very startup fun, you know, consumer packaging kind of look, but then when you make the shift to retail, you're playing in a totally different space when it comes to packaging design, the messaging on the box, like all of these things, I think, you know, clients need like long-term help with. So I definitely think that having, you know, being able to see these brands you've built much more farther out, I think it's more satisfying, and, you know, you're building a much better relationship with your clients, and you're seeing them through so many more kind of stages of life.
I think we're at a pretty good point to kind of wrap things up.
Cool.
I think the true lessons that I have learned from our conversation are to focus on what makes you you. How do you bring your personality into the work? Don't be afraid to hard pivot and do something else, even if it feels a little bit scary. It doesn't necessarily need to, because you can always start on your own time and then build up a body of work, build that portfolio, and then attract those like-minded clients that want you for you. So to the audience out there, remember that we're all legendary and have an amazing story of our own. So on the journey, take the time to be kind, grind, and unwind, the essential part. And let's make the world a better and more creative place to live. Thank you so much for being here, Haruko. I really, really appreciate the time. This has been so much fun.
I love that. What was it? Grind and unwind? Grind, be kind and unwind. I love that. Thank you. I've had a great time. Thank you so much.